So, welcome to another deep dive. We like to find those stories that kind of fall through the cracks or, maybe they got a lot of attention, but we still feel like there are things to unpack.
Yeah. Sometimes a story's so big, so strange that you need to kind of step back and really, look at all the angles.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today with this incredible event in the Senate. Cory Booker, pulled an all-nighter.
He did more than pull an all-nighter,
Yeah, well, I guess technically more than an all-nighter, right?
more than one all-nighter.
Yeah, spoke for over 24 hours straight on the Senate floor, protesting against the Trump administration's policies.
We've got these excerpts from an NPR article that really lays it all out. And I think it's worth taking the time to really dissect this because it's not just about, a long speech. It's about so much more than that, right?
It's about strategy. It's about the current political climate. It's about how resistance is evolving. And I think for anyone listening who's feeling maybe a little overwhelmed or disillusioned with how things are going right now, this deep dive might offer some new perspectives.
Absolutely. And maybe even some hope. I
Mhm.
mean, to see someone, take such a stand, it's pretty remarkable.
So let's start with just the basic facts.
Well,
Okay. Cory Booker began speaking at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, April 1st, 2025.
and kept going and going and going.
He did kept going well into Tuesday evening. So, right there, that's just a feat of human endurance, right? But it's also, like you said, so much more than that.
Right, because he wasn't just, rambling. He was delivering this incredibly detailed and impassioned critique of the Trump administration and its policies. It feels like a huge range of issues.
Which is where we get to the historical context here. This wasn't just a long speech. It was officially the longest speech in Senate history.
Right.
He beat the previous record held by Strom Thurmond back in 1957.
24 hours and 18 minutes, Strom Thurmond spoke for.
And now here's where it gets really interesting. And this is something that Senator Chris Murphy actually pointed out during Booker's speech. Thurmond's filibuster was against the Civil Rights Act.
Talk about a contrast, right? I mean, you have Thurmond trying to prevent basic rights for Black Americans, and then you have Booker, decades later, using this same tactic to defend rights that he sees as being threatened.
And it wasn't just the length of the speech that was drawing attention. The NPR report really paints this picture of like a really powerful emotional event. Booker was visibly moved at times, even wiping away tears. There were cheers from other Democrats. Even House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries was there showing support.
Tammy Baldwin was apparently seen crying, and Representative Lucy McBath was comforting someone during the applause. It's like you could feel the weight of the moment, right?
And Booker himself actually thanked his staff for their support during the speech. It's like they were all in this together.
Yeah, and it wasn't just those in the chamber who were captivated. I mean, the article mentions over 115,000 people watching the live stream of the speech on YouTube alone.
Yeah, so that raises the question, right? Why do this? Why speak for an entire day? I mean, there are other ways to make your point in the Senate, right?
Right, but I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier about strategy and the changing nature of resistance. Booker wasn't just trying to make a point to his fellow senators. He was clearly trying to reach a much broader audience.
And the NPR report actually quotes him as saying that he felt this deep responsibility to do something different, to, quote unquote, cause good trouble.
Which, of course, is a direct reference to the late Representative John Lewis, another powerful figure who dedicated his life to fighting for justice and equality.
So who exactly was he targeting with all of this? I mean, obviously it was a critique of the Trump administration, but he wasn't just speaking in generalities.
No, the article specifically mentions that the speech was directed at President Trump, White House senior advisor Elon Musk, and their administration's policies.
And he covered a lot of ground. I mean, we're talking immigration education, the economy, healthcare, Social Security, public education, free speech, even foreign policy. Like, it was really this comprehensive critique.
And it wasn't just him, sort of ranting from the Senate floor.
Right.
He actually incorporated portions of letters from his constituents.
Oh, wow. So he was really trying to, connect with people on a personal level.
Yeah, exactly. And he even included public comments from world leaders, trying to show how these issues were resonating globally.
That's a really interesting tactic, trying to ground his arguments in real world experiences and diverse perspectives.
Right, because it's one thing to say, this policy is bad. But it's another thing to actually show how it's affecting people's lives.
So he wasn't pulling any punches in terms of his assessment of the political climate either.
Oh, no. He straight up said that these are not normal times and shouldn't be treated as such in the Senate.
And he cited, a pattern of harm after harm inflicted on Americans in just the first 71 days of the Trump administration.
Which is interesting because the article also points out that just recently, 9 Democrats actually joined Republicans to advance a Trump-backed spending bill.
So there's this tension within the Democratic Party, right, between those who are willing to work with the administration and those who are taking a much harder line.
And Booker clearly falls into that second camp.
Yeah.
This speech was a very public and very forceful rejection of the administration's agenda.
And it's worth noting that his speaking style was very deliberate. He wasn't just like reading from a phone book or something.
No, he was very focused on the substance of Trump's agenda and its impact on everyday Americans.
So he was really trying to make this accessible to people who might not be, policy wonks.
Exactly. He was trying to connect with people on a gut level.
Yeah.
Show them how these policies were affecting their lives.
And he was also really smart about how he structured the speech. He connected domestic and foreign policy issues. He wasn't just jumping around randomly.
It was a very well thought out strategy.
Yeah.
Aimed at persuasion and raising awareness.
Okay, but let's talk about the elephant in the room here. How did he physically do this? I mean, 24 hours is a long time to be awake, let alone speaking on your feet.
Right. And apparently at the 15-hour mark, he was still saying he had fuel in the tank.
Seriously?
Yeah. And even after 16 hours and 24 minutes, when he admitted to being behind schedule, he just kept going. He even mentioned that he was moving on to housing issues because he had to obey my staff.
It's like a testament to the human will, right? And it also speaks to the level of preparation that went into this.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't just him, deciding to wing it. He had a team of people supporting him, making sure he had what he needed.
So now let's talk about the rules of the Senate here, because, people hear a 24-hour speech, they immediately think filibuster.
Right. But this wasn't technically a filibuster in the sense of trying to block a specific bill or nominee.
So how does that work?
So there's this Senate rule that allows a senator to speak for as long as they want, as long as they remain standing and keep speaking continuously.
So it's more about like grabbing the spotlight and using that time to make your point.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that a Senate page actually removed Booker's chair at one point.
Yeah.
Making sure he was following the rules.
Wow, so they're not messing around.
Nope. And another key tactic that Booker used was yielding for questions from his fellow Democrats.
So he was still technically speaking, but it gave him a chance to, catch his breath.
Yeah. And it also allowed other senators to chime in and show their support.
And the article lists like a dozen Democrats who participated, asking questions about everything from Medicaid and tariffs to national security, veterans affairs, agriculture and housing.
It really turned into this forum for highlighting all of these different concerns about the Trump administration.
And, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer even gave this really powerful speech praising Booker's, fortitude, strength, and crystalline brilliance.
He also used this really interesting phrase. He called it the Trump-Doge-Musk administration.
The what?
The Trump-Doge-Musk administration.
What is?
So DOGE refers to the Department of Government Efficiency, which is apparently this new department that Elon Musk is overseeing.
Oh, wow. So Schumer was basically saying that this administration is so unconventional that it deserves its own special label.
Exactly. And I think it also highlights, the concentration of power and influence in the executive branch, which is something that a lot of Democrats are concerned about.
So even though this was obviously a very serious event, there are also these moments of levity, which is kind of amazing considering the circumstances.
Yeah, like Amy Klobuchar asked Booker about his favorite New Jersey musician.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It's just this reminder that even in these high-stakes political battles, there's still room for, human connection.
And then there was that back and forth between Booker and Schumer about their shared New York Giants fandom.
Yeah, but they apparently disagree about where exactly their fandom originates.
That's hilarious. I love that they were able to find some humor in all of this.
It's like a pressure valve, right?
So just to put this into a broader historical context, the article mentions a few other lengthy Senate speeches.
Yeah, there was Chris Murphy's 15-hour speech on gun control after the Pulse shooting, which Booker actually supported.
So there's a precedent for this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And then there was Ted Cruz's 21-hour speech about the Affordable Care Act and Rand Paul's earlier filibuster.
And of course, the longest before Booker was Thurmond's 24-hour and 18-minute marathon against civil rights.
Right. And, it's worth noting that the article mentions how Thurmond sustained himself during that speech.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. It was like diced pumpernickel and bits of cooked hamburger.
Yeah, and he had this whole setup so that he could relieve himself without technically leaving the Senate floor.
Wow, they really thought of everything.
It's just this bizarre little footnote in Senate history.
So to kind of bring this all together, Cory Booker delivered this record-breaking speech over 24 hours as this really powerful act of protest against the Trump administration.
And it's important to remember that this wasn't just about breaking a record. It was about using this unique platform to articulate a comprehensive critique.
And to signal that there is this very strong opposition to the administration's agenda.
And, this event really captured the attention of people across the country and around the world. It's clear that there's a deep concern about the direction of the country.
So the key takeaway here is that this speech wasn't just a symbolic act. It was a strategic move to influence public discourse and potentially shape future political action.
And it raises a lot of interesting questions about, what other tactics might be used to resist this administration.
And what the long-term impact of this kind of political theater might be.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, considering all the issues that Booker covered in his speech.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, a lot. What single issue do you think has the most far-reaching consequences?
That's a tough one.
It is, but
Yeah.
it's worth considering because if we're going to effectively resist this administration, we need to be strategic and focused.
We need to prioritize our efforts and really think about what will have the biggest impact.
So take some time to reflect on that and, maybe do some of your own research into the issues that Booker discussed.
And think about how you can get involved and make your voice heard.
Because even though these are not normal times, as Booker said,
We still have the power to make a difference.
we just need to use it wisely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep pushing for a better future.
See you next time.
Bye.